Hello friends and gamers, and welcome to Fortress. My name is Jinx, and today I want to show you a map my friend modified. So it's an Axis and Allies Global 40 map that he modified about 2 years ago for just our little domestic house rule kind of stuff for fun, right? I've never actually played a game on it. I've had I had some impact on helping design with some suggestions here, there, and everywhere, but ultimately I never played it because 2 years ago I was pretty busy with having my firstborn son, something like that. So I wanted to show you guys it. So he took it, he modified it over Photoshop, and then he printed it off. And I think the canvas sheet cost him about 40, 50, 60 bucks, somewhere there, Canadian. So it wasn't that bad at all, because this is the same kind of plastic you'd use for a banner for your storefront. He just gave them the file and they printed it off. Now, I'm not sure if this is 100% legal. I'm pretty sure it is, because everybody who's played this owns a copy of this map. So maybe you are allowed to do it in that case, but I'm not advising in any way taking it and modifying things. Do things at your own discretion. But it's just interesting, and I thought we'd take a look at it. And we're not making any money off of it, or he isn't making any money off of it, and so that might come under some Creative Commons license. But I'm not a lawyer, so I can't figure it out. But I want to show you guys and take a look at some of the differences between this and the Global 40 map, and we'll go from there. Here is the map. Now, as you can see, the new modified map is a little bit bigger than the Global 40 map that we have here. You know, Axis and Allies have a slightly smaller map, and the new map is bigger, and that's nice because there are a few extra territories in the new modified map. So let's take a look more specifically on what occurs here. Now, I want to say that I am a very open person. You know, I share my thoughts fairly freely, and I'm gentle about it, and I don't think I'm overly harsh with things, but I'm fairly open, and I'm not going to flatter somebody just for the sake of flattery, right? If I see things that I like, I'm going to say it, and if I see things that could be improved, I'm going to share it as well too. And I think that's good because it nudges things into a better direction, in my opinion, and it nudges myself too. If people react hostilely towards me because of my openness, then I know that I need to correct myself and be a little less open with the way I work in the world. Now, I am using so I want to say that I'm going to, even though this map is designed by a friend of mine, I am still going to be critical about things, and I'm going to still point out things I like and things I'd like to improve on it, or things that could be improved on it. But overall, yeah, I think I gotta just be very honest with my thoughts. Now, I do have a very poor filming system. I have this camera stand here, and it's a cheap $20 camera stand from a Chinese marketplace of some kind. So it's very poor quality, but it's one of the things I didn't want to blow the whole budget on this thing. So I thought, so I don't have a great system setup. So I'm using my old trusty easel I got as a birthday gift, and I'll show you what the setup looks like. There it is, right? A hammer holding it down, some sticky tack right there, and a little battery pack just to hold up my phone. So very poor structural quality here. But yeah, so I apologize for any filming kind of, shakiness. Moving on. So we see my friend is Canadian, and so he's got a few changes on Canada, but overall, nothing much at all. Now, one thing you will notice is that over here, the capital cities are square, and still in red, but my friend has made the distinction of making them in green with still the squares on there as well. So he's made Canada as its own distinct nation, and so that's why it's got its green kind of square capital city there. It's still a victory city, but it's still in green. Everything else is more or less the same. There's nothing else added into this area. You'll see up north here, this roundel in Greenland. It is now, instead of US roundel, it's a Denmark roundel. Now, it will still start off as being controlled by USA. They'll just have in their setup sheet, they'll say, place a roundel in Greenland, and there we have it. Now, perhaps one of my suggestions would be to my friend is, if we're playing with a setup that starts in 1940, perhaps put a small little roundel right here, and a little American roundel in the lower right-hand or left-hand corner of an American roundel, and I think that would be quite handy, and that way people don't need to spend time setting up roundels on the rest of the board. Moving on. So the rest of America is basically the same. I can't see any changes there. You'll see over here, though, that he'll have adjacent to what's on the western side of the map, or eastern side of the map, both in Canada as well as up here, which is nice. It tidies things up and takes away some of the questions. You'll see also the convoy. He uses the old artistic design as opposed to the kind of the faded black ones, and I think these are quite nice because it stands out a little bit more prominently in your mind. and you remember to use them. You remember to raid them a little bit more. You know, it's kind of one of those visual things that strike you a little bit deeper. Now, in the West Indies and Mexico, you'll see there's a new roundel as well. Now, these also start off as American controlled, so again, tiny little roundel in the corners there. But yeah, you have the Mexican roundel right there, and I think that adds a little bit of flavor, and it's nice in general. Overall, I like the color of this map a bit better than the previous one, or the Global 40 one. I don't know, it's just a little bit more faded. It's not so mossy green. I think that's just the product of having it painted on canvas, but nonetheless, it's a nice fancy byproduct I quite like. Now here we have a few interesting things in South America. You will see that Venezuela is now something called axis leaning. Now I can't remember exactly what it is. Like I said, I've never played this game before, or this version of it. We're actually planning on it on the last weekend of August, but you see Venezuela is axis leaning, which I believe is probably going to be something like if the Axis captured two capitals of the allies or the opponents, then these axis leaning ones will become fully axis. Now that's just a suspicion. It might be other things as well. But you know, if that means if the axis player captures, say, Moscow and Paris, these might flip sides. My suspicion, but I could be wrong in that. Now you'll see that he added roundels for Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and that's nice. I like it. You know, it's a little bit more colorful than this kind of blankness over here. And he's also split the Amazon into 3 territories: one impassable jungle, northeast and southern Brazil. So that's quite nice. He split also these units into 2 spaces as well. Now, initially when I thought about this, I thought maybe you should have split the income between the 2. But then I recalled that for building factories, there is some benefit. I think you could only build factories in a territory that has at least an IPP value of 2. And so in that case, it does make sense that one of these territories has a 2. Now, maybe what a person should do is add an extra IPP over here, but maybe not. One thing I would like to see, though, is having more units present in this stuff. Even in these neutral nations, just throw 1 in there, 1 infantry in each one of those. I think that would be quite nice. There's no reason to capture these territories anyway, so perhaps I'd go the step further and say, perhaps we should introduce something called like a half IPP mechanic on here, or something like that, right? And thereby picking up some of these territories would be a little bit easier, or a little bit more lucrative, one could say. So 3 infantry here. I would add a couple extra, maybe 1 extra in northeast Brazil. I think that'd be quite nice. And Argentina he split into 2 as well. The same idea here with this Argentinian factory right here. You get, you know, you could build a factory here now with a 2 IPP or IPC, 2 IPC. I can't remember. Yeah, the 2 IPC value over here. And so you can build a factory here. That's quite nice. But the danger here is that you've scattered off these forces from having 4 in one territory. Now you have just 3 in one territory, and they're much easier to conquer. So what I most often see when I've played Global War 40 with my friend, what he most often does is he sends his Canadians down here to capture Brazil. Or, you know, because he likes to introduce the Canadians into it, they capture Brazil and increase their income a little bit. And then if possible, not always because the rules don't allow, but if possible, he grabs Argentina with them. Yeah, and then pads up the Canadian income. Now, I'd like to see a few more dudes out here because it is a little bit of an investment to get some German guys out here to capture this territory. So it'd be nice if it was reflected, you know, even if you sent a transport with an infantry or whatever down here, it's likely to be defeated or wiped out fairly quickly. So if you added an extra 2 infantry here in Argentina, I really wouldn't protest. And that would bring it on par with a nationalist Spain. So if you had 3 and 3, that's a total of 6. You know, that's nice. And likewise, you could do the same thing with these northeast Brazilians. Add a couple dudes, you know, 1 down here and 1 up here in northern Brazil. And likewise, you could do something, you know, either add a IPP in each of those territories to make it more interesting or something along those lines. I think that would be good. So that is it for this whole side of the globe. I quite like it. Overall, minor criticisms, but overall, I quite like it. Now, you know, I'm not going to go too far into like, oh, this territory border should be adjusted a little bit here and there because it doesn't do too much good for that. For instance, I think Argentina owns this little island here, but I could be wrong. Now, I think it'd be also cool to add Falkland Islands because how important they were or not. Well, they were quite important in the industrial age, and in World War I we saw some action there as well. I think it would have been a nice touch. Also, Argentina was interested in it as well. I think it would be interesting to add that as well, but no hardship. It's legitimately not a big deal. Let's move on to Western Europe. Let's not get bogged down too much. Starting off with the African continent. So you see that there have been the same roundel changes. Sierra Leone, Liberia have added roundels on it. overall it's roughly the same. You have a Portuguese allies leaning territory here, and I suspect again that's going to be something like if the allies capture one, I suspect it'd be one Axis capital city, then these allies leaning territories would join them. That's my suspicion. Now up here you'll see that there's a fascist nationalist Spain Axis leaning roundel here as well. You'll see Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. Now those are French controlled, and again I would put a little French roundel on the corners of each one. I think that would look quite nice in that case. I think that would be very, very good. We'll deal with the rest of Africa later on. Moving up to Spain now, because Spain has had some larger changes. We see over here that Spain has been split into many territories. You see Portugal is Axis leaning. That's Allies leaning. That's quite nice. A nice roundel there as well. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 territories where once there was one. Yeah, that is some interesting stuff. So what I would say in this regards is you have the whole issue again of going from one concentrated area to splitting it up. So it's actually a disadvantage to the defender, to the person who owns those territories, because now you have your income split and you also have the troops you gain quite quickly split as well. That causes some issues, right, for the defense, because now you got to defend all kinds of territories instead of just one. So it's a disadvantage there, and so perhaps you might not want the Axis-leaning nation to join you. You might want them to stay more neutral, and if you have the option to keep them out of the war, it might be best to keep them out of the war, because then you don't have to worry about all kinds of protection here. But if you do open them up, now you can do Operation, what was it called? Felix, I think it was called, when you captured Gibraltar from the coast, marching down here. And that would work quite nicely as well. This one, I think I would do some territory adjustments, just slight adjustments, but overall, I think overall it's pretty good. Yeah, overall it's pretty good. I don't think there's too much I would change. Perhaps I'd join these two territories together. I think that would be pretty good situation to do then, because it's not overly big, right? Join them together, and then the rest of it I think works out fairly good. Now one thing too is instead of having a potential factory built here by whoever captured this area, it's now split, so you won't be able to build a factory here, which works out quite nicely. And the defender has the advantage of having the income, but he now can't build a factory. But that doesn't matter if it's the Axis. If the Americans come in and grab it, then yes, then they're going to be hurting a little bit, because before what they could do is 1, 2, 3 and drop off troops in Spain, right, and capture Spain, and that was an option. Now, of course, I remember in Axis and Allies Global, you had an issue with strict neutrals. If you declare war on one of them, they would all declare war on you, and that can be an issue. But at the same token, that's 1, 2, 3. How many territories? 4, 5. You could pick up a lot of money still by declaring war on strict neutrals, but likely, perhaps not. Okay, that's an idea. Moving on from there, let's take a look at France. France has had one change, well, two, I suppose. The Paris is now in green color, and Normandy, Bordeaux have been split into 2 territories. And southern France, instead of being worth 3, has now been worth down to 2, and Normandy has picked up that last buck. That's been the changes there. I don't know, I quite like the change. It's, again, harder for the Axis to protect it all, and so a lot of these changes, one might say, is harder on the Axis. And perhaps that's a product of in our games, the person who modified this game would tend to play the Allies, and so they felt that they were at a bit of a disadvantage. So perhaps that is the issue there. But you'll also see that across the map you have now, Axis leaning stuff, and so that kind of gets a little bit more interesting. Now the problem there is, if it's the way I suspect, with 2 Axis or 2 Allied capitals falling before the Axis leaning become Axis or pro-Axis, then really at that point, once you capture 2 capitals, you're over the hill anyways, and now you're likely on the winning side anyways. You've already captured Paris and, say, Moscow, and now it's a little bit easier, and you almost don't need, this advantage is going to benefit you, but only when you're already winning the game. Whereas this one here, if things go historically, it's just to your detriment. So you have to really push hard to capture that capital for you to win the game, and legitimately you're probably already winning the game once you capture 2 capitals. It might be different. It might say something like if you hold an X amount of victory cities, then they become Axis leaning, and that becomes much more doable. You could say you hold on to, well, I see here Warsaw, Kiev, Paris, and Stalingrad and Leningrad, perhaps, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and perhaps Cairo, right? And maybe then they'd go, or maybe each one has special conditions. Like, for instance, Spain, it might join if Cairo becomes Axis controlled, or Cairo and, say, Cairo, London, and Paris becomes axis controlled, and then it would be axis leaning. So it's really hard to say. Okay, one change here. He's made Balearic Islands into axis leaning. I think that's a mistake. It's a little bit too small, but nonetheless, it's good enough, right? I think it's okay. Moving on, we have up here, we have England. Looks good. Nothing to change on England. It looks excellent. We see Iceland has got the Iceland symbol on there, but nonetheless quite good. Pro-allies, a roundel has been added. Looks good. Also, you see an extra territory, I guess, has been added here in Ireland, which, yeah, sure, why not? That doesn't really harm me too much. Holland and Belgium now have 2 roundels in 1 territory, so that's interesting. And Denmark now has its own roundel. Again, I'd put the little, German roundel on the corners, one of each. I think that would be quite handy in Denmark as well. I think that would do quite nicely. And taking a quick peek down south, Switzerland, of course, has 2. I would honestly say put that up to, say, 4 infantry there. I think that would be worthwhile because 2 really isn't that much of a speed bump. Now, of course, this is worth no units there, so no income. So if I was to add an income, I'd go so far as to put, like, say, 6 infantry there. I think that would be good. And that really puts a deterrent on anybody going after the strict neutrals, right? 6 units in the immediate hands, or either aggressive against the Axis, or like right on the Axis border or something, then yeah, I think that would be quite handy. And Corsica is its own island as well. You see over here, Corsica is part of Italy. In here, it's its own island. And that takes care of that side of the globe. Let's move on to the next sheet. Bear with me one moment as I fold up this map and slide it across. So let's take a look at the rest of Africa. The rest of Africa has got some changes, not too much. Just a roundel change over here, nothing too special. Rhodesia, well, yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah, sure. Allies leaning Angola and Allies leaning Mozambique looks good. French Madagascar looks excellent as well. Tanganyika territory, Belgian Congo administered from London. That all looks basically the same as what it was before. Ethiopia now has its own roundel as well. Looks excellent. No issues there. You see a little bit more action happening up here in Libya. You see that they have their own. You see here they have their own roundels now. Libya, Tobruk. Now I would have gone so far as to do a name change on this stuff too. Cyrenaica. That's one of the suggestions I recommended for Global War 36. Call this one Cyrenaica. That's its own ancient Roman name. Tobruk was a small city up here. I believe Global War 36 used to call it, what they used to call it, something with a K, Kira, something like that. I can't remember. Something really small. And again, that was a small village somewhere down here. So in the end, Tobruk, Cyrenaica is a better one. A lot of this stuff I would have recommended some name changes, but yeah, that works quite well. I probably should have suggested something for this stuff as well. Like, for instance, southern Argentina could have been called Paraguay, and Gran Chaco, like up here. That's what I recommended back in the day for World War 36. I'm sure other people recommended it as well. It wasn't just me. Now you see Sicily has had some slight changes. It's gotten 1 income over here, 1 IPP. It used to have, what did it used to have? I'm just taking a look at Sardinia. Sardinia also has 1 IPP where it used to have none. So where is that money coming from? I believe that is actually extra money. So Sardinia is worth $1, Sicily is worth $1. And that's $2 more than they used to have. And that's quite nice. I'm quite happy with that. It gives them a little bit more of a fighting chance. And yeah, you see the roundel has changed. Now this is kind of an Iranian roundel. I'm not sure why Axis and Allies started off with this. Maybe at one point Italy did have this roundel as well. But yeah, that's the actual one that existed. All right, let's look at Germany right now. Germany, you see, has a few things going on here. You have Austria has its own roundel. You have Brandenburg has, split into 2 territories. And part of that, too, is because Pomerania was, Germany here is too close to the coast. And so by splitting it into 2 territories, it's made it a little bit harder for anybody to capture that area. And you see up north, Sweden has added, changed into 2 territories as opposed to just 1. And that's quite, I think that's a nice move as well. Let's see if the other one's worth $1. So yeah, that works out nicely. And Norway too, roundel change. And now again, do the whole thing of that little German roundel in the corner. Now I probably would have taken the liberty of adding a few extra convoy raiding markers almost on every coast. I think I would have done that. I would have done one here. I would have done one here, I would have done one here. I think it would have been worthwhile doing it everywhere, because that way this one here can be hit by both England and Normandy. This one here could, you could venture out there with your subs and try to hit the Scottish coast and do some damage there. And so the British would have to be kind of on high alert, and likewise up here as well, the Germans would have to protect Sea Zone 112 and 126. That was a major kind of port up here, which they would ship Swedish iron up here to Norway and send them down south. I think that's what I would have done in this game. Now, yeah, that has ups and downs, but it would have helped kind of balancing out the game, especially in regards to the defending Axis having to protect more territories, like in Bordeaux and Normandy, and a few other odds and ends places like that, and say northern and southern Norway, right? That would have been worthwhile too. Just helps balance things out. My 2 cents on the matter. And while we're looking at Finland here, you see Finland has been split into a few territories, 2 as opposed to 1 territory here. Pro-Axis, but now it's into 2 territories. You have the same issue there as well with the troops being split up a little bit. I would have put all 4 down south in southern Finland. I think that would have been good, but nonetheless, we'll leave it at that. You'll notice that southern Sweden is pro-Axis leaning, so that's something to note as well. Vyborg has a Finland symbol, but it is still in Soviet control. Karelia is the same, and yeah, we'll move on from there. We see Poland as well has its own roundel. Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, it all looks good. Now you'll see too that Bessarabia also shares that roundel. Bulgaria, yep, all looks good. Greece, yeah, Greece works. One could split into multiple territories, but I'm pretty content with how that looks. In fact, I think I would have gone so far as to split into 2 territories and maybe make the joint mark right here. I think that would be good. That way you don't have the Bulgarians marching straight down to Greece. I would put 1 infantry here, the other 3 down here, keep the 2 bucks over here, split it right here, and so now you can only attack Greece first from Albania, and you don't have the German forces coming from Bulgaria to Greece. I think that would have been much better, because usually what happens is, well, yeah, the Germans send a force down here, and then that force comes there, or something along those lines, I believe. And Crete is still its own island with its own roundel as well. So that works out nicely. I would also add another convoy raiding mark right here. I think that would be good. As well as one perhaps there. Basically off the coast of anywhere. So almost to the point of perhaps everywhere should have a convoy raid marker, including in perhaps everywhere off the coast is just automatically everybody can raid off the coast of anything. That might be an option. Anyways, moving on. Let's take a look at the rest of this place. You see Egypt has its own roundel as well. You see, I think we covered that too. Transjordan has one. The Suez Canal, you see over here. Okay, let's talk about this. Suez Canal, you see this marker here. It means you can, that probably means, I suspect that means you can walk across. I'm suspecting that's what it is, because it's not a strait or canal that you can close, because you wouldn't have, Gibraltar does not have the same thing, but you have Sicily here. So I'm thinking these are just adjacent territories you can walk across. You can either float your boats across or you can walk across. I suspect that's what it is. It's just simply something you can walk from one territory to the next. Moving on, you see Turkey has been split into 2 territories. Now, I still think you should have put 6 infantry here and 2 over here. I think that would have been better. Syria has its own roundel as well. Pro-Axis, you have a pro-Axis over here. Iraq, Saudi Arabia looks good. Nothing else to add there. All of Russia is more or less the same. Nothing has changed up there. When I look at it, it looks altogether the same. Now you have Persia split into, well, not split. You have them 3 distinctive territories, which looks good. That's normal. Afghanistan has its own roundel. And that takes care of everything here. No other changes. Yeah. No other changes, except you see that India now has its own roundel as well, like this Union Jack as opposed to that roundel. That takes care of that. Let's take a look at the next tile and see what there is to see. Nothing too much, just a few odd and then roundels added to places. These are all different. Yeah, they're all a little bit different, but more or less the same, guys. Like the roundels are all the same. Over here, it looks the most colorful, or most changes look like it occurs here, because you have all that. Now, perhaps, yeah, I don't know what to do with that, if it stays strict neutral. I think that I'm happy with that. That makes sense to me. you'll see that Hubei over here is a CCP capital. I don't even know if we start off with, I think China is still one nation and there's no CCP units. If memory serves, you just simply would put a KMT roundel in the lower right hand corner and that's that. I think that's the way that would work out. Likewise, you do the same thing here with these territories. And I suppose that's where my friend took his initiative from too, because these still have the roundels of the Japanese placed on it on the start of the game, even though they have the roundels. The war already starts in place there. So likewise, he does the same thing with the rest of the globe. I would simply put a little Japanese token on the corners of each of those as well too. I think that makes sense, but perhaps not, because you have to distinguish if it's recaptured or not. For French and Siam, again, the roundel changed. Singapore is now, as opposed to before, it wasn't a victory city. I think it should be, and so likewise he did too, and he put it as a victory city. He also named this one the Burma Road, where before it was just a red line, right? So that works quite nicely. I think that about does all the changes here that there are worth looking at. Yeah, Vladivostok up north here. So that is one change. Before it used to be one territory called Amur. Now it's split into, what's that, 2 territories? 3 territories? 3 territories, which makes it a little bit harder to attack into that territory, which works nicely. And now we look at Japan. Yeah, let's take a quick dive down at looking at Anzac Territories first before we go into Japan. Anzac, simply a roundel change. That's about it. Nothing special there. Nothing special to report. You see, yeah, that's about it. He could have theoretically added this Malaluka Island here as well. It's big enough, but yeah. Now, if I should have put more emphasis on this. I would have done more C-zone changes, but realistically, I was not too interested in designing this game. I had my own stuff I liked, and I thought the time for Global War 40 has been out of date. I think there's better games out there than Global 40, in my humble opinion. Now, Japan has been changed quite a bit to the detriment of the Axis, I would say. It's really not ideal whatsoever for them. You see that now they've split up. Their 8 IPP from one single territory has been split up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Much more harder to defend against the Americans coming in. And I don't think that's good. Now, primarily, I am an Axis player in this game. My friend happens to really enjoy playing the Allies, and so I find myself always playing the Axis, and it's always been that way too. I don't have any actual preference. I'm okay with either or, but just by familiarity, I'm more experienced with the Axis than otherwise. And so I see right away how bad this is for the Japanese. Like, what do? You can't protect it all against an American attack, and so it's really, really, really unfortunate for the Japanese, and that's one big flaw in this game that makes me not even want to play the Axis, to be honest. I'd rather play the Communists or the Allies or whatever all else, just because of how much more difficult it is now. They have more territories to traverse. They got they got more territories to defend, especially here as Japan, as well as, Germany now has what is it? It's got one extra territory in the form of Pomerania, and it's got one extra in the form of Normandy, right? So it's got a little bit more territories to protect there as well. Plus, then you have Norway, one extra territory there. It's hard. It's really hard for them. Yeah, and that's quite unfortunate. But not my game. It's just my suggestions, right? And maybe I'm mistaken in this, because this is, at the end of the day, just one person's opinion. One thing I do quite like, though, is this Manchurian roundel. You don't often see it, right? And that looks quite nice. You see it, this one here has just a KMT roundel. It's got a nice Manchurian roundel. I believe the KMT can still march into that territory, but nonetheless, I quite like it. And now we have Canada. Now, this is a slight advantage to the Axis, let's say, because now the Alaskan territory has been split from one territory to 2 territories. Now, it's both a pro and a con, because yes, America has to defend those 2 territories, but they don't really care too much. They can, because overall, before it used to be that the Japanese could come in here and build a factory. Now, that's one thing I've done in one of my games, is build a factory there and be a constant nuisance. So now, of course, it didn't last too long, but nonetheless, that's one thing I did. Now you can't even do that. But on the flip side, it does take the Americans a little bit longer to get you if you go into Western Alaska, and you might have a chance to get out of there, right? So that does work out as well. I believe that covers it. Western Canada has been split into 2 as well, and that works quite nice. And they've also been given an extra buck, which is debatable if they needed it. But again, this is kind of an amateur house rule kind of production, and not to knock down my friend, not whatsoever. You know, he's done a fantastic job of this. I'm just, I just I share my opinion quite freely, and sometimes that opinion might not be the best. So here we have it. I'm overall interested in trying this game out at the end of the month. I think at the end of the day, because this is its first, I'm not even going to call it an edition because it's not like it's going to go into formal printing or anything like that, but it's its first test as far as I know. And I'm sure within that test we'll come to these flaws as well. And this is just my going over things and kind of foreseeing the future problems that might exist in the game. And yeah, I thought I would share that thought on the subject. There's other things that probably could be changed and added. For instance, I would probably redo the sea zones in a massive way. I think it's way past due for all of this kind of genre type game. But yeah, that'll come probably with time. I see there's been one change over there with the Azores being added. Yeah, the Azores have been added over here. They used to not exist. That's kind of nice to see them represented here. What utility they'll have, we'll have to see. But you see, it kind of strikes a person as odd because you don't oftentimes have islands in Global 40 within, bordering two sea zones. It's rare if ever seen. I know, of course, Ireland does that, but that is literally the only major island or only island of small enough, a single island territory size that does that. Everything else, like Sicily, Sardinia, New Zealand, there's one exception in New Guinea, but New Guinea is fairly big. Everything else has just one, so you see that's been an addition there as well. So yeah, that is my thoughts on the subject. I would change a few things here for sure, but overall, it'll be fun to try out. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's just a game, and we do this for fun and for our own enjoyment. And if things don't work out, we just go back to the drawing board and redraw it or not, whatever happens. Like one man's opinion is just as worthy as another man's opinion. And overall, I think this is a worthy attempt and adds some color and character to the map with extra roundels that makes it more flavorful than the actual original Global 40 map. But it does make me really become interested in the BBR map. I've never seen it, never played it. Not even looked at it too closely. It just looks very artistically beautiful, and it's something I might want to try at some point. Oh, I see he's also split a sea zone here into 91A and 91B, so that's interesting too. It used to be, man, that changes things a little. Oh, he's also connected two territories. So he's connected these two sea zones together here. He's connected them. This used to be 92 and 94, and he's connecting them to 94. And this becomes a new 92, and 91 has. This used to be a couple extra territories, and now they've been joined into one. So I suppose that could be. I don't know who that would advantage a person. Anyways, so yeah, I think overall it's a nice board game. It does some fantastic coloring and nice work all around on it, and good job overall. I think there are definitely things I would probably write up a list and suggest to my friend, and he's very open to it too, and he approached me at the time too with my suggestions, and I started to go in depth, but I was just too swamped with other stuff in my life that I never actually sent him the file with my suggestions, if I remember correctly, and probably would change in the future. Anyways, looking forward to trying it. It could be a lot of fun. Cheers all, and talk to y'all later.